There are people in the Imperium who believe damnation is a single moment, a scream, a ritual circle drawn in blood, a whisper answered too quickly. But that belief exists only because the truth is harder to face. Damnation is not an event. It is a process. It begins long before a cultist ever learns the true name of the god they will one day beg to hear. It begins with hunger, with silence, with a slow understanding that the Imperium does not notice you unless you're useful or dead. Chaos does not need to conquer worlds. It only needs to wait for people who have already been abandoned. And when it finally reaches for them, it does not offer power first. It offers meaning. The price comes later, when it is already impossible to walk away. If you want to hear more stories about the hidden costs of survival, belief, and betrayal in the grim darkness of Warhammer 40k, you can support the channel by liking the video, sharing it with others who walk these shadows, and subscribing so you don't miss what waits further down the path. It begins in places the Imperium no longer bothers to describe in detail. A lower manufactorum tier, where the air tastes permanently of burnt oil and recycled breath. An Underhive corridor where lumen strips flicker just often enough to remind people that light is a privilege, not a guarantee. A frontier settlement whose name exists on a data slate, but not in any mouth that matters. These are places where survival is not heroic. It is repetitive. Wake, work, endure, sleep, and for many, even sleep is a luxury interrupted by hunger, by cold, by the distant thunder machines that do not care who they crush so long as quotas are met. The Imperium calls this order, to those living inside it. It feels more like neglect that has learned how to justify itself. People disappear here without ceremony. A servitor malfunction claims an arm, and no one files a report. A manufactorum shift runs long, and someone collapses, their body dragged aside, so the line can continue. In the Underhive, Arbites raids happen fast and leave faster, scooping up names that were never properly recorded to begin with. Faith exists, of course. Shrines are everywhere. The Imperial Aquila watches from rusted walls and cracked plasteel. But faith offered without relief eventually begins to feel like mockery. This is where the first lie of chaos takes shape. It does not announce itself with blasphemy. It arrives quietly, wearing the face of concern. Someone notices you miss a meal and shares theirs. Someone listens when you complain about the noise, the cold, the way the world seems designed to grind you down until you stop resisting. They do not curse the Emperor. They do not speak of gods. They speak of fairness, of balance, of how suffering must mean something. Otherwise it would be unbearable. These gatherings are small at first. A few people at the end of the shift, huddled in a disused alcove where the machines drown out conversation. There is laughter here, subdued but real. There is warmth that has nothing to do with temperature. For the first time in a long while, no one is measuring your work by output or obedience. No one demands proof of faith. You are not special. You are simply welcome. That is the lie. Chaos does not recruit with power, because power attracts scrutiny. It recruits with recognition. It tells you that your pain has been seen, that your exhaustion is justified, that the galaxy did not forget you by accident. It abandoned you on purpose, and abandonment deserves an answer. This answer is not framed as rebellion. It is framed as survival with dignity. Stories circulate quietly. Not sermons, not doctrine. Stories about other worlds like this one, about people who suffered just as much, until they learn to listen to truths the Imperium refuses to acknowledge. These truths are vague by design. They speak of forces that reward honesty, of entities that do not hide behind bureaucracy and ritual. Names are not used. Names come later, when belief has already taken root. What matters is contrast. Inside the cult's gatherings, people speak freely. Outside, every word feels monitored. Inside, suffering is discussed openly. Outside, it is treated as weakness or punishment. Inside, there is meaning. Outside, there's only endurance. The first rituals are indistinguishable from superstition. A symbol scratched into a wall for luck. A whispered phrase repeated before a dangerous task. A shared gesture meant to ward off misfortune. No demons appear. No reality bends. If anything, life improves slightly. People feel calmer. more focused. Coincidences seem kinder. A shift supervisor overlooks a mistake. An Arbites patrol passes by without stopping. It is enough to feel like confirmation. This is how chaos teaches patience. Those who hesitate are never pushed. The cult does not need everyone. It needs enough to form a pattern, enough to feel like community. Those who walk away are not threatened. They are pitted. The cult understands something the Imperium does not bother to exploit. Loneliness is more persuasive than fear. Over time, the language changes subtly. Complaints become explanations. Explanations become principles. Principles become boundaries. Certain topics are discouraged, not forbidden. Certain questions receive smiles instead of answers. You are told that understanding comes with trust, and trust comes with time. This feels reasonable. Everything else in your life has demanded patience without reward. At least here, patience comes with companionship. The cult does not tell you that the Imperium is wrong. It tells you the Imperium is incomplete, that it sees only one version of the galaxy, and that version requires people like you to suffer quietly so the machine can continue running. Chaos, it suggests, does not deny suffering. It acknowledges it. It gives it shape. By the time you notice how much of your life now revolves around these gatherings, it is already too late to frame them as optional. The cult has become the place where you are most yourself, where you speak without fear, where the world makes sense in a way it never did before. Walking away would mean returning to silence, and silence feels like death. You do not know the name of the God you are serving yet. You do not need to. The first lie has already done its work. You believe you have found refuge in a galaxy that offered you none. And somewhere beyond the walls, the warp listens, patient and amused, as another soul learns how easy it is to mistake being noticed for being saved. The Imperium teaches that heresy announces itself. That corruption has a smell, a color, a shape you can identify before it reaches you. That is a comforting belief, because it suggests danger can be avoided through vigilance alone. In truth, the earliest stages of a cult do not feel like corruption. They feel like a second chance, like the first time you've been allowed to breathe, without choking on your own resentment. The gathering spread the way warmth spreads through a cold room, not explosively, not through proclamation, but through quiet evidence. A friend who looks less exhausted. A co-worker who stops drinking themselves numb after every shift. A neighbor who suddenly has food to spare. The Underhive is full of people who have learned to distrust miracles, yet these changes are small enough to feel plausible. That plausibility is the second lie, softer than the first and far more durable. It makes you believe nothing unnatural is happening. It makes you believe you are simply finding what should have existed all along. Soon there are rules, though no one calls them that. You are encouraged to keep the gatherings private, not out of fear, but out of respect. Outsiders would not understand. Outsiders would mock what they have never needed. You are told that the Imperium punishes anything it cannot categorize, and this is true enough to feel protective rather than manipulative. Privacy becomes a sign of belonging. Secrecy becomes intimacy. A symbol appears on the underside of a data-slate, a small mark carved into the corner of a stairwell. Nothing elaborate, nothing that would alarm a passing Arbites patrol at a glance. It looks like street graffiti, like a gang sign, like nothing worth recording. But those who know it feel a small pulse of recognition, like catching a familiar scent in a crowded corridor. The mark becomes a map, guiding the lost toward places where they will be welcomed. You are asked, eventually, to do something that feels like charity. Help a new person, bring them food, speak to them gently, tell them they are not alone. The request is framed as kindness, and kindness is a currency rare enough in Imperium that it feels sacred. You comply. Of course you do. You remember what it felt like to be seen for the first time. You want to give that feeling to someone else. You do not realize you're being used as a vector, because the act still feels like yours. This is how the cult grows without ever feeling like it is recruiting. The first time the cult asks for sacrifice, it does not begin with blood. It begins with inconvenience. A shift swapped so someone else can attend. A small theft from a manufactorum storeroom justified as redistribution. A lie told to an overseer with the reassurance that the overseer would never have shown you the same mercy. Each act is minor, Each act can be rationalized. Each act creates a thread that ties you a little tighter to the group. Then something happens that feels like proof. Not of gods, not of cosmic forces, but of protection. An Arbites raid sweeps through the level above yours, scooping up suspects, dragging people into the light they will never return from. Your corridor should have been next. Everyone knows it. You can hear boots on metal, voices barking orders, the harsh crackle of Vox traffic. You press yourself against the wall, heart pounding, certain you are about to be discovered. And then the raid passes. Not because the Arbites showed mercy, because they never even turned down your corridor. Afterward, the cult does not celebrate openly. Celebration attracts attention. Instead, there's quiet gratitude, the kind that feels like reverence even when no one kneels. People exchange glances that say, without words, that something watched over them. Someone whispers that the universe notices loyalty. Someone else says that the Imperium's reach is not absolute, that there are cracks in its grip if you know how to stand in the right place. No one claims certainty. Certainty would feel like a lie. Instead, they offer implication, and implication is irresistible when you are desperate. From this point on, your mind begins to reinterpret coincidences. A machine that should have failed holds together long enough to finish a shift. An overseer who would normally punish mistakes looks away. A rival gang that has been harassing your block suddenly vanishes, leaving behind only a few torn bodies and a smell like burnt copper. Each event can be explained. Each event can be dismissed as chance. But the pattern is what matters, and the cult teaches you to see patterns as messages. Slowly, the group's language becomes more precise. Words like the Imperium and the Emperor are still spoken, but with a different cadence, as if they become parts of story rather than unquestioned truth. New terms appear, always introduced carefully, as if to test whether your mind will recoil. The true powers, the hidden currents, the ones who answer. Names remain unspoken, but the shape of belief becomes clearer. You are being led towards something vast, and you are being taught to feel grateful for the direction. The cult also begins to isolate you from anything that might pull you back. Friends outside the gatherings are described as asleep, trapped in imperial lies. Family members who express concern are treated as threats, not because they are cruel, but because they might force you to choose. Choice is dangerous to the cult. It cannot afford you imagining life without it. You start to notice how your days are structured now. Work is endured so you can return to the gatherings. Hunger is tolerated because you know someone will share food later. Fear of the Arbites becomes manageable because you believe something else is watching. The cult has become your oxygen. It has replaced the Imperium's indifference with attention. And attention feels like love when you've been starving long enough. That is the final refinement of the first lie. Chaos does not need to convince you to hate the Emperor. It only needs to convince you that you were already abandoned and that the abandonment was deserved. Once you accept that, the rest comes naturally. You will do what you must to stay inside the only refuge you have ever known, even as that refuge quietly reshapes into a cage. And when the cult finally speaks a name aloud, when the first true ritual is prepared, you'll already be holding the knife without remembering when it entered your hand. Devotion does not arrive as ecstasy. It settles in like routine, quiet and methodical, threading itself through daily life until it becomes difficult to remember where belief ends and habit begins. The cult understands this instinctively. Wild passion burns out too fast. What it needs is structure, something solid enough to lean on when fear returns. So the gatherings change. They grow less conversational, more deliberate. People sit in the same places. The same phrases are spoken in the same order. What once felt spontaneous begins to feel necessary. Ritual replaces discussion, because ritual does not invite argument. When someone asks why a gesture must be performed a certain way, they are told that precision matters, not because the gods demand it, but because belief requires discipline. Sloppiness, they are warned gently, leads to misunderstanding. Misunderstanding leads to attention. Attention invites the Imperium. The logic feels sound. The cult is not asking for blind faith. It is asking for care. The symbols grow clearer now. No longer crude scratches hidden in shadowed corridors, but carefully drawn marks placed where only initiates will notice them. They are still subtle, still defensible as graffiti or industrial notation, but they carry more weight. You feel it when you see them. A faint tightening in the chest, a sense of alignment. The cult teaches you that this is recognition, not compulsion. That your mind is learning to see what it was always meant to see. Your time becomes less your own, not through force, but through expectation. If you miss a gathering, someone checks on you. If you arrive late, the ritual pauses, just long enough to make you aware of your absence. No one scolds you. That would feel too much like the Imperium. Instead, they express concern. You feel guilty for disrupting something that now feels fragile and important. You promise yourself it won't happen again. The cult begins to ask you to distance yourself from things that interfere with clarity. Alcohol dulls perception. Recreational chems blur the senses. Excessive noise disrupts focus. None of this is framed as moral purity. It is framed as readiness. The warp, they explain carefully, responds best to minds that are attentive and aligned. You want to be ready. You want to contribute meaningfully. So you comply, grateful for a sense of progress that your life has never offered before. Externally, pressure increases. Arbites patrols linger longer near your sector. An ecclesiarchy preacher arrives, denouncing false faiths with a voice that carries fear beneath its certainty. You listen from the edge of the crowd, heart racing, convinced for a moment that everything is about to collapse. Later, in the gathering, you are reassured. This was expected. The Imperium always senses change eventually. The fact that it is reacting proves that something real is happening. Resistance is framed not as danger, but as validation. At this stage, devotion becomes transactional without ever feeling cynical. You give time, obedience, secrecy. In return, you receive safety, belonging, and the quiet conviction that your suffering is no longer random. This exchange feels fair. More than fair. It feels like balance being restored. The cult does not need to threaten you. You police yourself, because losing this would mean returning to a life that now feels empty by comparison. Small acts of enforcement begin to appear. Someone who breaks protocol is quietly corrected. Someone who asks too many questions is reassigned to less central tasks. These measures are justified as protection, not punishment. The cult is still fragile, still growing. It cannot afford mistakes. You accept this. You have seen what happens to those who draw imperial attention. Discipline feels like care when the alternative is annihilation. The first time you feel fear inside the gathering, it surprises you. Not fear of the Imperium, but fear of being seen as insufficient. A phrase catches in your throat during recitation. Your hand hesitates over a symbol. For a moment, the room feels very still. Then it passes. No one comments. But you carry the tension with you long afterward, replaying the moment, promising yourself you will do better next time. You do not realize that this fear has replaced your old one. It is more focused, more productive. Devotion has taken shape now. It is no longer just refuge. It is expectation. The cult does not tell you who to be outright. It shows you, through repetition, correction, and reward. You are becoming someone who belongs here, someone who will be lost without it. The Imperium fades into abstraction, a distant threat rather than a live reality. The cult is immediate, tangible, present, and beneath it all, the warp presses closer, responding not to grand invocations, but to consistency, to minds aligning in purpose. However small that purpose may still be, you cannot feel it clearly yet, but something has begun to take notice. Not because you are powerful, not because you are chosen, but because you are willing. The cult's greatest success is not in what it teaches you to believe, but in what it teaches you to stop imagining. Alternatives fade quietly. Other futures feel thin, implausible, like stories told to children who have never known hunger. The cult becomes the only place where effort feels rewarded, where attention feels mutual. Everything else begins to feel like noise. Language tightens. Certain phrases are encouraged, others gently discouraged. You are reminded to speak with care, not because words offend the gods, but because words shape thought. Thought shapes alignment. Alignment shapes outcome. This chain is repeated often enough that it feels self-evident. You begin to monitor your speech even outside the gatherings. catching yourself before old habits surface. The cult is no longer a place you go. It is a posture you carry. Mistakes are handled with quiet efficiency. Someone fails to follow a ritual sequence precisely. Someone repeats a rumor that has not been approved. The response is never public. They are taken aside, spoken to privately, reminded of what is at stake. When they return, they are subdued, grateful, and eager to correct themselves. You tell yourself this is mercy. You tell yourself Imperium would have done worse. Both things are true enough to be convincing. The first exclusion happens without announcement. A familiar face simply stops appearing. No explanation is offered, and none is requested. Silence settles around their absence like dust. You feel a brief flicker of concern, quickly followed by relief that it was not you. That relief is uncomfortable. You suppress it. Suppression becomes easier with practice. Devotion now expresses itself through vigilance. You watch one another, not with suspicion, but with care sharpened into scrutiny. Is someone distracted? Are they hesitating during recitation? Do they still speak fondly of imperial authority? These observations are framed as responsibility, not betrayal. The cult survives because its members protect it, and protection sometimes requires intervention. You accept this logic because you have seen what happens to groups that do not protect themselves. Outside pressure intensifies. An Arbites checkpoint appears closer to your sector than before. A local overseer begins asking questions about productivity fluctuations. The cult responds by tightening routines, limiting movement, refining cover stories. These measures feel prudent, even comforting. Structure equals safety. You follow instruction precisely, proud of how smoothly everything operates. The cult feels intelligent in a way the Imperium never did. Responsive, adaptive. Then the rituals begin to change. At first, the difference is subtle. A longer pause between phrases. A gesture held just a moment too long. The air feels heavier afterward, charged in a way that makes the skin prickle. Someone remarks that they feel more awake. Another says they slept without nightmares for the first time in years. These comments are noted, not celebrated. The cult is careful. It is not rush-proof. Proof attracts questions. Soon, small effects become harder to dismiss. A candle flame bends toward a symbol etched into the floor. A drop of blood beads and crawls against gravity before falling. The room smells faintly of copper and ozone, though no machinery is active nearby. You feel these changes more than you see them. A pressure behind the eyes, a warmth in the chest that feels like anticipation rather than fear. No one claims this is the gods answering. That would be too obvious. Instead, it is framed as alignment producing resonance. The warp, they explain, is not a place of monsters by default. It is a reflection. What you bring to it determines what returns. The Imperium fears it because the Imperium is built on lies and repression. You are different. You are honest about your suffering. That honesty matters. The first time something goes wrong, it is contained quickly. A member convulses during a ritual, blood trickling from their nose, eyes unfocused. The ritual leaders intervene immediately, breaking the sequence, applying counter gestures taught only to those who have earned deeper trust. The convulsions stop. The member is escorted away, shaken but alive. Later, you are told this was a learning moment. The warp responds strongly to alignment, but alignment must be handled with care. Discipline protects everyone. Fear returns, but it is no longer directed outward. It is directed inward, at the possibility of being the weak point. You double your focus. You rehearse sequences in your sleep. You correct others gently when they falter. The cult rewards this behavior with subtle approval, a nod, a task of slightly greater importance, access to conversations you were not previously part of. You feel yourself advancing, though no ranks are ever named. By now, the Imperium feels distant, almost abstract. Its symbols still exist, but they feel hollow, like decorations from a life you no longer inhabit. The cult, by contrast, feels alive, responsive, dangerous, perhaps, but so is everything worth keeping. You tell yourself that danger is the price of truth. You tell yourself that fear means you are close to something real. When a cult finally prepares for a ritual that cannot be easily explained away, When the symbols are drawn openly and the words spoken carry weight that presses against your skull, you do not hesitate. Hesitation belongs to the life you left behind. This life demands commitment. You kneel without being asked. You offer what is required without being told why. The warp stirs, and this time, it does not feel distant or patient. It feels attentive. The first time the warp answers, it does not arrive as revelation. It arrives as interruption. The ritual is proceeding exactly as instructed, voices aligned, symbols traced with care, every movement precise enough to feel reassuring. Then something stutters. Not the chanting, not the participants, but reality itself. The air thickens, as if the room has been submerged in something heavier than atmosphere. Sound dulls at the edges. Breath feels slightly delayed, arriving a fraction of a second after the lungs demand it. No one speaks. No one needs to. Everyone feels it. The cult leaders do not react with surprise. That is what convinces you this is not a mistake. They slow the cadence, subtly adjusting rhythm without breaking form. You follow, heart hammering, mind racing but focused. Fear surges, then settles into something sharper. Attention. Whatever is happening, it is happening because you have done something correctly. The first sign is physical. A line of blood seeps from beneath someone's fingernails, thin and bright, pooling on the floor in a pattern that mirrors the symbol beneath them. They do not cry out. They look almost relieved, as if a pressure they did not know how to name has finally found an outlet. The smell hits a moment later, copper and ozone, sharp enough to sting the back of the throat. You fight the urge to gag. Discipline matters now more than ever. Then the room responds. The lumen strips flicker, not randomly, but in sequence, dimming toward the center of the chamber as if attention is being drawn inward. Shadows stretch and soften, losing their sharp imperial angles and pooling in curves that do not quite align with the architecture. You feel sensation behind your eyes, not pain, but expansion, as if your perception has been given more space than it knows how to use. Someone whispers a name. It is not shouted. It is not proclaimed. It slips into the ritual like a breath that does not belong to anyone present. The word is unfamiliar, shaped wrong for the tongue, carrying weight without meaning. You do not understand it, but you feel it settle into the room, anchoring the moment. The cult leaders do not repeat it. They do not need to. Repetition would invite scrutiny. One acknowledgement is enough. The warp presses closer, and with it comes sensation without context. You feel hunger that is not yours. Satisfaction that has nothing to do with food or safety. A sense of vast attention passing over the gathering like a hand hovering above a flame. It does not touch. It does not need to. Being noticed is enough to make your skin prickle and your thoughts stumble. This is where the truth begins to fracture. You were told the warp reflects what is brought to it. That alignment produces harmony. That honesty invites understanding. All of that feels partially true and dangerously incomplete. The presence in the room does not feel cruel, but it does not feel kind either. It feels curious, appraising, as if measuring whether the shape you are making together is worth further attention. Someone sobs quietly, not in fear, in relief. The cult leaders guide the ritual toward closure with deliberate calm, sealing symbols, breaking the circle with practiced gestures. The pressure recedes slowly, like a tide withdrawing but leaving something altered behind. When the final words are spoken, the room feels wrong in a way you cannot articulate. Not corrupted, not desecrated. Simply deeper, as if the walls now remember something they did not before. No one speaks for a long moment. Then, carefully, breathing resumes at a normal pace. People look at one another with expressions that hover between awe and dread. You feel lightheaded, drained, yet intensely awake. The world outside the chamber feels distant, unreal, like a place you visited once and never quite belonged to. The cult leaders finally address you. Their voice is steady but subdued. They do not call this a success. They call it contact. They remind you that contact is not communion, that what answer did so because conditions were right, not because it is benevolent. They stress discipline, restraint, humility. This is not a god to be commanded. It is a force to be survived. You nod, along with everyone else. You understand this intellectually. Emotionally, something else has taken root. Because for the first time in your life, something vast has noticed you, not as a statistic, not as labor, not as a potential threat, as presence, as alignment, as shape. The Imperium never did that. In the hours that follow, consequences ripple outward. Sleep is impossible. Dreams fracture into overlapping images that dissolve before forming. Waking thoughts feel louder, sharper, as if the mind has been tuned to a frequency it cannot quite escape. Some members develop fevers. Others cannot stop shaking. One collapses entirely, mind gone somewhere unreachable, body breathing but unresponsive. They are carried away quietly. No explanations are offered. You do not ask, because you understand now that asking the wrong questions is no longer merely dangerous. It is offensive. The warp has answered, and in doing so, it has shifted the balance of the cult. Faith is no longer hypothetical. Doubt is no longer harmless. What you do next matters in ways it never did before. You feel it as you leave the chamber, stepping back into corridors that look the same but feel thinner, less certain. The Imperium still exists beyond these walls. Arbites still patrol. Shrines still burn incense. But something has slipped between layers of reality, and it knows where to find you. This is the moment the cult can no longer pretend it is only a refuge. It has become a door. After contact, nothing returns to baseline. The cult leaders insist it has, repeating the phrase with firmness that feels rehearsed, but the line no longer settles comfortably. You feel the difference in mundane moments, in the way silence carries weight now, in the way shadows seem to linger as if reluctant to let go of their shapes. Reality feels thinner, stretched just enough that you are constantly aware how easily it could tear again. The warp does not shout. It hums, a low, persistent pressure at the edge of thought that sharpens when emotion spikes. Anger draws it closer. Fear does the same. Even joy, brief and unfamiliar, feels like a beacon. You learn quickly that control is no longer optional. Where once the cult emphasized alignment as a philosophical goal, it now becomes survival doctrine. Discipline is enforced not because deviation invites imperial attention, but because deviation invites something far less predictable. The leaders reorganize responsibilities without explanation. Some members are kept closer to the center, involved in preparations and discussions that grow increasingly technical. Others are moved outward, assigned logistical tasks, told their presence is still vital but in different ways. This stratification is subtle enough to feel natural, but its effect is immediate. Access becomes currency. Proximity becomes status. You find yourself paying closer attention to who stands where, who speaks during preparation, who is asked to remain silent. The next ritual is smaller by design. Fewer participants, shorter duration. The cult insists this is caution, a necessary recalibration after first contact. You believe them because you need to. The memory of that vast attention still makes your hands tremble when you think about it. Part of you wants to feel it again. A larger part is terrified of what repetition might cost. This time, the warp responds faster. There is no stutter, no gradual thickening of air. The pressure arrives immediately, like stepping into deep water, without warning. A symbol carved into the floor glows faintly, not with light, but with absence, as if the space it occupies is consuming illumination rather than reflecting it. Someone gasps, breath hitching painfully, and you realize too late that the sound is being pulled inward, swallowed before it can echo. Pain surfaces without clear cause. A burning sensation crawls along your spine, blooming between your shoulder blades. It is not injury. It feels purposeful, as if something is testing the limits of the shape you are offering it. Around you, others react in different ways. One collapses to their knees, retching violently. Another laughs, a brittle, hysterical sound that snaps into a scream as their voice cracks and distorts into something raw and animal. The leaders intervene swiftly, aborting the sequence before it can escalate further. Counter gestures snap into place. Words are spoken with urgency this time, their meaning irrelevant compared to their cadence. The pressure recedes, but it does not vanish cleanly. It leaves residue, a heaviness that clings to the room and to you, settling behind the eyes like a bruise. Afterward, the explanation is careful and incomplete. The warp, you are told, responds differently once contact has been established. Boundaries are remembered, patterns recognized. What answered before now knows how to reach you more efficiently. This is not failure. It is progress. Progress simply demands greater precision. That word lodges in your mind. Progress. You notice changes in the cult's language after that. Less talk of refuge, more talk of readiness. Less emphasis on comfort, more on contribution. The gods, once framed as distant listeners, are now spoken of as forces with preferences. You are warned against assuming those preferences align with human survival. Survival, you are told, is not the highest value in the warp. Alignment is. The first death occurs during what is officially described as a miscalculation. A member whose enthusiasm often outpaces their control pushes beyond prescribed limits, drawing too deeply, too quickly. The reaction is immediate and catastrophic. Their flesh twists, not explosively, but inward, collapsing as if crushed by invisible pressure. Bones snap with wet, muffled sounds. Blood pools. Then begins to steam as the temperature in the room spikes unpredictably. The smell is overwhelming. Copper layered with something acrid and sweet that makes your stomach lurch. The leaders act without hesitation. They sever the connection, complete the containment rites, and order the body removed. No one screams. Shock freezes you in place, mind struggling to process the violence you have just witnessed. When it is over, the room is cleaned with industrial efficiency. Symbols are scrubbed away. Fresh wards are etched. The absence where the member once stood is left unremarked. Later, you are told that the death was necessary, not in the sense of inevitability, but in the sense of instruction. The warp is unforgiving of error. It does not tolerate improvisation. The cult did not cause the death. The member did by failing to respect the structure that keeps everyone alive. You accept this explanation because rejecting it would mean confronting a worse possibility. That the gods do not distinguish between mistakes and offerings. That they respond to intensity, not intention. Sleep becomes fragmented after that. Dreams bleed into waking moments. Images intruding without warning. You see shapes moving just out of focus. You hear whispers that stop when you concentrate on them. The cult assures you this is normal. That sensitivity increases with exposure. That you are adjusting. Adjusting to what exactly is no longer clear. What you do understand is that the cult has crossed a threshold. The rituals are no longer symbolic. They are functional. Each one carries risk that cannot be fully mitigated. And yet, stopping now feels impossible. The warp has answered. It knows you exist. To turn away would not restore safety. It would simply remove the thin layer of discipline that keeps the worst consequences at bay. You begin to see the cult differently, not as a refuge, but as containment, a structure built not to explore the warp freely, but to survive its attention for as long as possible. The gods have not promised protection. They have offered engagement, and engagement comes with expectations that grow heavier each time they are met. As Imperial pressure continues to tighten outside, Arbites patrols growing bolder, informants sniffing closer to your sector. The cult faces a choice it has been postponing. Remain small and risk discovery, or escalate, draw more power, and secure protection that only the warp can offer. When the leaders announce that the next ritual will be different, larger in scope and consequence, you feel a cold certainty settle in your chest. This is no longer about refuge. It is about survival, under terms you no longer get to negotiate. Escalation is never announced as desperation. It is framed as responsibility. The cult leaders gather those deemed most reliable, those whose control is held through fear, blood, and failure, and speak to them in lowered voices that carry the weight of inevitability. The Imperium is closing in. Informants have been sighted. Arbites patrols now pause near entrances they once ignored. The space in which the cult can exist quietly is shrinking, and silence is no longer protection. Something larger must be done. The language shifts again, subtly but decisively. Where once the gods were spoken of as distant currents, now they're described as patrons. Not saviors, not tyrants, but entities with interests that can be aligned with. This framing is careful. It preserves the illusion of agency, while narrowing the range of acceptable choices. The cult is told that continued survival requires commitment deep enough to be unmistakable. Half measures invite attention without protection. Full devotion, they imply, draws notice that can be leveraged. You feel the truth of this in your bones, though no one phrases it so bluntly. The warp has already proven that it responds to intensity. The Imperium responds only to authority. The cult stand between them, too small to resist one, too exposed to ignore the other. The only remaining option is to become useful to something that does not fear Imperial reprisal. Preparation for the next ritual is unlike anything before it. Symbols are no longer hidden. They are carved deep, permanent, etched into floors and walls with tools meant to scar rather than mark. Blood is required openly now, not as an accident or consequence, but as material. The act of offering it feels less like sacrifice and more like declaration. This is who we are. This is what we are willing to be. As the preparations intensify, you begin to notice how the gods are spoken of differently depending on who is listening. To newer members, they are still framed as forces of truth and liberation. To those closer to the center, they are described with more caution. Vast, hungry, patient. The contradictions are not resolved. They are compartmentalized. Understanding is no longer a goal. Function is. The first time you hear the phrase spoken plainly, it takes a moment to register. Owned, not in the sense of chains or obedience, but in the sense of claim. The gods do not demand worship in the way the Imperium demands compliance. They assert ownership by responding, by altering reality in ways that cannot be undone, by leaving marks that persist whether you believe in them or not. Once touched, you are no longer unclaimed. This realization settles heavily. You think back to the promises that drew you here. Meaning, refuge, balance. None of them were lies exactly. They were incomplete truths, offered in a sequence designed to keep you moving forward without ever stopping long enough to see the shape of the path. Chaos did not free you from being used. It simply replaced a hand that holds a leash. The ritual begins with sound rather than a gesture, a low resonance that vibrates through the floor, up through your legs, into your chest. It is not chanted. It is sustained, produced by voices layered until individual tones dissolve into a single, droning presence. The air thickens almost immediately. The warp does not hesitate this time. It arrives with familiarity. As if stepping into a room it is already measured, pressure builds fast, faster than before. Your vision tunnels, colors draining toward shades that do not exist in the physical spectrum. You taste blood, though you have not bitten your tongue. The symbols burn with cold, a sensation that crawls across your skin and settles behind your eyes. Panic surges, then is crushed by something heavier. Not calm, submission. You feel it then, unmistakably. Not a voice, not a command. A sense of alignment snapping into place, like a mechanism locking. The gods do not speak to you. They do not need to. They have already accepted the offer being made on your behalf. The cult is no longer asking for attention. It is finalizing terms. Somewhere in the chamber, flesh changes shape. Not violently, not yet, but enough to be undeniable. A limb elongates slightly, joints bending in ways anatomy does not permit. Eyes cloud, then clear, reflecting light at angles that make it hard to meet their gaze. These changes are not celebrated. They are acknowledged with reverent silence. Proof of claim. You realize with a clarity that leaves no room for denial that this is not ascension, it is conscription. The gods are not interested in your beliefs. They are interested in what you can be turned into, how effectively your body, your fear, your devotion can be repurposed. The cult's role is not to worship endlessly, but to shape offerings into forms that can be used. Each ritual is not a plea, but delivery. When the pressure finally recedes, you collapse to your knees, muscles shaking, breath coming in ragged gasps. The room is altered now, permanently. Cracks web across surfaces where symbols were carved too deeply. The air smells of copper and scorched stone. Someone is dead. Someone else is no longer entirely human. Both facts are treated with the same quiet acceptance. Afterward, there is no celebration, no reassurance. The leaders speak briefly, outlining new expectations. Relocation will begin soon. Contact with outsiders must be severed completely. The cult's purpose is shifted. It is no longer to survive unnoticed. It is to prepare assets. That word rings in your ears long after the gathering disperses. Assets. You are no longer hiding from the Imperium. You are being shaped for something far worse. Once the gods have made a claim, the cult changes faster than any manufactorum schedule ever did. Days compress into directives, preparations, movements that feel less like decisions and more like the unfolding of something already planned. People stop speaking casually. Jokes vanish. Even kindness becomes functional, offered only when it reinforces compliance. The refuge you once found here is replaced by an atmosphere of tense coordination, like a unit preparing for deployment. The first instruction is simple and absolute. Sever ties. Anyone not bound to the cult is now a liability. Family, friends, co-workers. Connections that once made life bearable are reframed as openings for the Imperium to reach inside. You are told this is protection, that the gods demand clarity of allegiance. You do not argue, because argument requires believing you still have a choice. Some leave anyway. A few slip away in the night, taking what little they can carry, convinced that disappearance is still possible. The cult does not pursue them openly. Pursuit draws attention, but you hear whispers afterward. You see the way the leaders exchange glances, the way certain names are spoken once and never again. The deserters are described as weak, as unready, as tragic. Then the subject shifts as if their fate is no longer relevant. The next ritual confirms why. It is not performed in the chamber anymore. It is done in a place closer to the surface, nearer to entrances the Arbites might plausibly discover. The risk is deliberate. The cult is no longer trying to avoid attention. It is trying to survive it by ensuring that when the Imperium arrives, it arrives into something prepared. The symbols are drawn larger, wider, designed to anchor pressure across a broader space. Blood is used more freely, painted in thick lines that dry darker than it should. The chanting begins low, steady, and you feel the warp answer before the sequence even reaches its midpoint. The air becomes viscous. Light bends. The hairs on your arms lift as if pulled toward an unseen current. Then you sense it, not one presence, but many, not fully formed entities, but impressions, shapes pressing against the veil, curious and hungry. The cult leaders remain calm. They guide the rhythm, holding the door open just wide enough for contact, but not wide enough for catastrophe. This is not worship. It is controlled exposure, like testing a toxin in measured doses. And still, something pushes through. A figure forms briefly at the edge of sight, a distortion in the air that suggests limbs where there should be none. The shape does not fully enter. It does not need to. It presses close enough that the temperature drops sharply, breath frosting in the air. You feel a pressure in your skull, a sense of attention sliding over you with clinical interest. There is no kindness in it, no hatred either, only appraisal. Someone sobs. Someone laughs. Someone bites their tongue hard enough to bleed, desperate to anchor themselves in pain that is human and familiar. The cult leaders do not intervene. They watch, measuring responses. This is selection. After the ritual, those who reacted incorrectly are separated. The criteria are never explained, but you see the pattern. Those who showed terror are deemed unstable. Those who showed joy are deemed compromised. Those who remained unnaturally still are deemed valuable. The cult is no longer a community. It is a sorting mechanism. You begin to understand what ownership means in practice. It is not constant possession. It is access. The gods have learned how to reach you, how to touch reality around you, how to induce changes that cannot be reversed. The cult leaders interpret these touches as signs, as instructions. They claim to know what the gods want. Whether they truly do is irrelevant. They behave as though they do, and that behavior reshapes the cult's direction. Food becomes scarce. Sleep becomes fragmented. Paranoia blooms, not only of the Imperium, but of one another. People whisper about who has been marked for transformation, who has been chosen for deeper rites, who will be used as offerings when the time comes. These whispers are not corrected. Fear is useful now. Fear sharpens obedience. You feel changes in yourself too. Not dramatic mutations, not yet, but subtle shifts that make you question your own boundaries. Sensations arrive that do not match their triggers. Hunger that flares after rituals, not for food, but for something less definable. Moments where the world seems slightly out of sync, as if you're seeing a heartbeat ahead of where it should be. A faint metallic taste that appears whenever you think too hard about leaving. These are not punishments. They are reminders. The gods do not need to chase you. They are already inside the way you perceive reality. The cult begins relocating, moving deeper into the Underhive, then outward through maintenance corridors and forgotten transit routes. They travel in small groups, carrying tools, symbols, bundles of supplies. The movement feels rehearsed, as the contingency plans existed long before you ever joined. That realization is unsettling. It suggests that your personal story was never central. You were always one more component in a structure designed to endure. When the Imperium finally strikes, it does not feel like interruption. It feels like confirmation. A distant clang of boots, the harsh bark of Vox orders, the sudden flare of lumen beams sweeping through corridors. The Arbites are here, and the cult does not panic the way it once would have. Panic belongs to unclaimed people. Claimed people prepare to be used. The leaders signal for silence. They position members at specific junctions. They begin drawing symbols in places that make no tactical sense, as if preparing the environment rather than defending it. You realize then that the cult is not planning to fight the Imperium in the way the Imperium expects. It is planning to offer the Imperium to the warp. And as you hear the first gunshots echo through the Underhive, the sound sharp and final, the question that had been growing inside you finally reaches the surface. What happens to a cultist when the gods decide you are no longer useful as a believer, but as an ingredient? You do not have time to answer it. The ritual begins. The moment the Imperium arrives in force, the cult stops pretending it ever had a future of its own. Whatever dreams of survival, of carving out a hidden existence beneath the Imperium's notice, are abandoned without ceremony. This was always where the path led. The warp did not offer escape. It offered use. The Arbites advanced methodically, shock malls crackling, Vox grills barking orders that echo down corridors choked with incense and blood-scented air. They expect resistance. What they find instead is preparation. Symbols already etched into walls they never thought to inspect. Pressure points chosen not for cover, but for resonance. The cult has reshaped the Underhive into something that listens. The ritual begins before the first breach charge detonates. It has to. Timing matters now in ways no one fully understands, but everyone obeys. Voices rise, not in unison, but in layered sequences that overlap and collapse into a low, grinding hum. You feel it in your teeth, in the joints of your hands, in the soft places behind your eyes where fear used to live. The warp answers immediately, no longer curious, no longer tentative. Reality bends without warning. Walls sweat condensation that smells of rust and decay. Lumen strips burst in synchronized pops, plunging entire sections into pulsing half-light, where shadows move independently of their sources. You taste copper again, stronger this time, and something else beneath it, sweet and cloying, like overripe fruit left too long in heat. The air feels thick enough to wade through. The first Arbite squad round the corner and stops dead. Their discipline holds for half a second, long enough for surprise to register. Then the floor beneath them buckles inward, not collapsing, but folding, as if the space itself has been pinched. Two are crushed instantly, armor screaming as it deforms. A third fires blindly, bolt rounds tearing through walls that no longer behave like walls. The fourth begins to scream as something wraps around his legs, unseen but undeniably solid. You do not feel triumph watching this. You feel relief. Relief that the gods are answering. Relief that all of this meant something. Relief that the suffering, the fear, the blood were not wasted on silence. That relief lasts only moments, because the warp does not distinguish between offering and offering plate. The pressure spikes, far beyond anything you've felt before. Your vision fractures into overlapping layers, each one slightly out of sync. You see the corridor as it is, as it was, and as it might be, All at once, your heart stutters, struggling to keep time with a reality that has lost its rhythm. Someone near you collapses, body convulsing as their spine arches violently. Flesh stretches, bones grinding audibly beneath skin. Their mouth opens in a soundless scream as their jaw elongates, teeth splitting and reforming into something jagged and wrong. This is not possession. There is no replacement, no clean takeover. This is repurposing, raw and indifferent. The cult leaders shout counterphrases, trying to stabilize the flow, but their voices are strained now. Edged with panic, they can no longer fully hide. The gods are not following the script. They are responding to opportunity. The presence pressing into the space is vast, layered, uninterested in individual outcomes. It wants density, emotion, fear, resistance. The Arbites are providing plenty of that. You realize then that the cult was never meant to survive this moment. It was meant to trigger it. The gods do not need believers once the door is fully open. Believers are scaffolding. Once the structure holds on its own, the scaffolding can be torn away without consequence. A shockwave ripples through the chamber, throwing you hard against the wall. Pain explodes through your shoulder, hot and immediate. You taste blood, your own this time, thick and metallic. For a brief, grounding moment, the pain is comforting. It is real. It is human. It reminds you that you still exist as something separate. That separation is fading. You feel something slide across your thoughts, not invading, not replacing, but indexing. As if your fear, your devotion, your endurance are being measured and cataloged. The sensation is impersonal to the point of cruelty. You are not being judged. You are being assessed for compatibility. Around you, the cult is unraveling. Some members flee blindly, only to be caught by distortions that snap shut like jaws. Others drop to their knees, chanting frantically, trying to reassert control through obedience. A few stand unnaturally still, eyes glassy, bodies held rigid as invisible forces reshape them from the inside out. These are the ones who were deemed valuable earlier. You understand now what that meant. The Arbites are dying in numbers that should feel satisfying. Instead, it feels irrelevant. Their presence has already served its purpose. They brought violence, fear, and authority into a space primed to consume all three. Whether they live or die no longer matters to the gods. What matters is momentum. You stagger to your feet, ears ringing, lungs burning. And for the first time since joining the cult, you think clearly enough to feel regret without justification. Not for betraying the Imperium. That betrayal feels distant, abstract. You regret believing that chaos cared whether you lived. The gods never promise survival. They promise continuation. And continuation, you now understand, does not include you as you are. The ritual does not end. It mutates. What the cult prepared as a sequence becomes a cascade. Symbols bleeding into one another as the warp overwhelms the structure meant to contain it. Words lose their edges, syllables stretching and folding until language itself feels optional. You cannot tell whether you are still chanting or simply thinking too loudly. The distinction no longer matters. The warp is responding to impulse now, not instruction. Imperial fire tears through the chamber in bright, brutal flashes, bolt rounds detonating bodies into ruin that should have been final. Instead, death behaves unpredictably. Some fall and remain still, blessedly inert. Others rise again, not reanimated, but unfinished. Their forms held together by something that refuses to let go of the raw materials it has been given. Limbs drag at wrong angles. Voices emerge from mouths that no longer understand speech. The gods are not creating soldiers. They are experimenting. You try to run, not toward escape, but away from the center, away from the place where reality feels most fragile. The floor ripples beneath your feet, responding to panic like a struck nerve. You stumble, catch yourself on a wall that feels warm and faintly elastic, and pull your hand back in horror as the surface dents inward before slowly returning to shape. The Underhive is no longer architecture. It is a boundary. Your thoughts fracture under the strain. Memories surface out of order. The first meal shared in a hidden alcove. The first symbol scratched into metal. The moment you felt noticed for the first time. Each memory arrives with a new understanding layer to top it, as if the warp is replaying your life not out of sentiment, but to trace how efficiently you were led here. There is no accusation in this examination, only confirmation. Something large moves through the space without fully entering it. You cannot see it directly, but you feel the displacement, the way the pressure shifts as if a vast mass has passed close by. Wherever that presence lingers, transformation accelerates. Flesh sloughs away from bone. Bone reshapes into frameworks that no longer support anything recognizable as human. Screams cut off abruptly, not because mouths are destroyed, but because the need to scream is removed. You drop to your knees, clutching your head, overwhelmed by sensation. This is the moment you expected terror to peak, to become unbearable. Instead, something else happens. Clarity, not peace, not acceptance, understanding. You see the shape of the lie in its entirety now, from a first shared meal to this collapsing chamber. Chaos never promised you dignity. It promised relevance. In a galaxy where the Imperium reduces people to labor and casualties, relevance feels like salvation. The cult did not oppose that logic. It perfected it. You were not freed from being used. You were refined into something more efficient to use. The gods do not hate you. Hate will require focus. You are beneath hatred. You are material. The warp does not judge suffering as unjust or deserved. It recognizes only intensity and availability. You provided both in abundance. A shadow falls across you, not cast by any visible form. The air grows impossibly cold, breath freezing in your lungs. You feel your thoughts slow, each one weighed down as if gravity has increased inside your skull. This is the moment you realize when whatever remains of you will be decided. You expect pain. Instead, you feel pressure compressing you inward, stripping away layers of fear, hope, memory. Identity peels back in stages, each one removed with mechanical indifference. You try to hold on to something, your name, a face, a moment, but they slide away, irrelevant to the process underway. This is what the cult leaders meant by ownership, not possession in the sense of control, but claim in the sense of inevitability. You were marked the moment the warp answered you. Everything since then was simply alignment, positioning you where extraction would be most efficient. If there is mercy here, it is accidental. As your awareness thins, you sense others being drawn into the same process. Threads of consciousness pulled toward a center you cannot perceive directly. Some resist, flaring brightly for a moment before collapsing. Others dissolve quietly, their fear smoothed away as function replaces self. You do not know which fate awaits you. You only know that none of them involve leaving. The Arbites are gone now, either dead or irrelevant. The cult, as a concept, no longer exists. What remains is a wound in reality that is slowly closing, having taken what it came for. The gods do not linger to admire their work. They withdraw as soon as extraction is complete, leaving behind warped stone, broken bodies, and silence that feels heavier than any sound. In the aftermath, there will be reports. An Underhive collapse, a gas explosion, a heretical cell neutralized. The Imperium will file the incident away, satisfied that order has been restored. Shrines will be rededicated, lumen strips replaced. Life will resume above, unchanged. No record will note what truly occurred here. If any fragment of you remains aware as the process concludes, it is aware of one final truth. Chaos did not deceive you about the galaxy's cruelty. It merely offered to make you part of it in a different way. The Imperium grinds people into survival. Chaos grinds them into permanence. The dreadful fate of a chaos cultist is not death. It is relevance without escape. And somewhere, far away, another forgotten place waits patiently, ready to offer someone else the first lie all over again.